So I used AI to analyze Carlos Alcaraz's serve, and I got this chart. And then I used AI to analyze my serve because I wanted to see how I would stack up against Carlos. Now, if you want more power on your serve, I think you're going to find this chart really interesting because this is measuring Alcaraz's back hip. We could have measured every single joint, but we chose the back hip because how fast it goes up and how far it goes up. We refer to that as vertical hip displacement. That has a huge correlation with your serve speed. So if you improve just that, you're going to serve with a lot more power. So let's break down this chart real quick. 0 here is that line, and basically what that means is anything above this line, the hip is accelerating up, and then anything below the line, the hip is accelerating down. So what you can see here is Alcaraz's hip is accelerating down and then goes way up. And that's literally, he's just bending his knees and then jumping. Now, what is interesting about this, and let's take a hot second to talk about the kinetic chain, which is just the scientific term for how do you generate power in your lower body, transfer it to your upper body, and then get it into the ball. That's like a very simplistic way to describe it. But what you'll notice here, this point right here, is when Alcaraz's back hip is moving up and fastest. The velocity is the fastest right here. And then it starts to decline, and then this dotted line here is contact. So the hip is moving up faster before contact. And that makes sense because, okay, I've generated power from my lower body, I've really explosively jumped, but I need to get it into my upper body, through my arm, and into the ball. So I don't want to say that the lower body's work is done here, but it's sort of, the energy has been transferred prior to contact. Hopefully that makes sense. Now, this line is coming down, so you might be like, oh, does that mean the hip is coming down? No, it just means the hip is slowing down. So his hip is actually still going up, it's just going up slower. Again, and that just all has to do with the kinetic chain. It's very complicated. I don't really fully get it, but I get it enough to draw all these arrows on the screen. So this chart is in centimeters per second, which we don't like here at Fuzzy Yellow Balls because we're in America. We don't do the metric system. We do the imperial system, which makes no sense, but Alcaraz's hip is moving up at 6.55 miles per hour. So that's just the vertical, how fast it's going up, not into the court or anything like that. But if you're like, is that good? What does that mean exactly? Well, for comparison, if you jumped and were moving up at 10 miles an hour, that would be a 40-inch vertical, so you'd be playing in the NBA. Michael Jordan had a vertical of 48 inches, which is like, you know, insane. But 40 inches, a 40-inch vertical is nuts. And so Alcaraz, you know, he's not quite there, but obviously the serve is different than trying to dunk a tennis ball or a basketball. But this is what tennis athleticism looks like. And I mean, he has to do this 200, 150, 200 times in a match. And this is the equivalent, if your hip is moving up that fast, then that's one of the elements necessary for like a 130 mile an hour serve. Okay, so now, how far does the hip travel, right? So here we've got the bottom of the knee bend, and you can see the curve is super sharp, but right here it flattens out a teeny bit. It's not quite as steep. And again, that's because the velocity of his hip, it reaches its maximum before contact, and then it starts to slow down. So contact is right here, and it's not quite as steep anymore. And then you can see the top of the maximum height of his hip is actually after he makes contact with the tennis ball. So that's like an interesting takeaway, is you don't want the hip at its maximum height when you make contact. It actually should rise a little bit after you make contact with the tennis ball. But from the bottom of his knee bend to the maximum height of his hip is 61.8 centimeters, which works out to like exactly 2 feet. So if we use a tennis racket for reference, which is about 27 inches, if his hip started here, it's moving up to about here over the course of his serve, which is like, that's a long distance. All right, so I wanted to see how my serve stacked up against Carlos. So I ran my serve through AI, and this AI is an AI tennis coach we created. His name is Bert. So if you go to the App Store and you type in BERT, just search for Bert, he will come up and you can download him. You can get your serve analyzed as well. He'll tell you what mistakes you're making and how to fix them so you can serve a lot harder. Okay, so here is my chart overlaid with Alcaraz's. So Alcaraz is still in the orange and I'm the blue, and you can see that this is the vertical hip displacement. Sorry, this is the velocity. So this is how fast our hips are moving. You can see it's like half. I'm like half of Carlos Alcaraz, which makes sense since he's basically half my age and spends more time in the gym. But you can see if you look at the charts, the timing of everything is pretty similar, right? I also reach my max hip velocity before contact. It kind of is just, again, it mirrors what Alcaraz is doing. It's just not as explosive. So what that tells me, like I look at that, I'm like, okay, that's actually like, I'm glad to see that because it means, at least from a technical standpoint, like my technique, it matches. So I'm like, okay, my technique is pretty clean. Now I just need to hit the gym and find a time machine and go back 20 years and have different parents with better genes. Just kidding, Mom and Dad, you're right. So here's the last chart. This is the height of my hip, and this is obviously the height of Alcaraz's hip. So here's the bottom of my hip, and there's the top, and here's the bottom for Alcaraz, and there is the top. And obviously Alcaraz's hip is going, traveling a much bigger distance than mine because he's got a deeper knee bend, and then he obviously jumps way higher. And this is the essence of vertical hip displacement and the difference between a 100-mile-an-hour serve and like 135-mile-an-hour serve. But it's now something we can measure. So if you want to measure yours, go check out Bert inside of the App Store.